I have a 69 Corvette with a Chevy 350 in it, and I started experiencing a valve tick, and I was able to resolve that by doing a rocker arm adjustment. Step 1 was taking off the valve cover and then setting the engine to top dead center. I did this by marking the 0 mark on my timing tab with a silver Sharpie so that I could better see this when marking up the next piece, which was marking the harmonic balancer itself and then rotating it clockwise until the two lined up perfectly. I then removed the distributor cap to check the position of the rotor, and in this case it was pointing in the front towards the number 1 cylinder, which is what I wanted, but if it was pointing in the back, then I just had to rotate the crank an additional 360 degrees. The next step was to tighten the rocker arms, which I did while also twisting the push rod between my thumb and index finger until I hit a point of resistance. At that point, I just turned the rocker nut an additional 3/4 turns to properly set the preload on the lifter itself. The next step was to rotate the crank 90 degrees to the next cylinder in the firing order, and I was able to use the distributor rotor as a guide to be able to do that. So I used a felt tip pen to mark the underside of the distributor and give myself a stopping point, which you can see right over here. This stuff comes off pretty easily, so it's no big deal to be able to put this on the bottom of the distributor. And at this point, I was able to rotate the crank to the desired position. With the crank in position, I was able to adjust the rockers in the number 8 cylinder. I then repeated this process of marking the distributor, rotating the crank 90 degrees, and then adjusting the rocker arms for each cylinder in the firing order. The next step was to wipe off any debris on top of the cylinder heads and then install the valve cover gaskets. For this, I used a 3M weather strip and gasket adhesive on the backs of the valve covers themselves, and then I used a Felpro VS 12869T steel reinforced rubber valve cover gasket. Wow, that is a mouthful. At this point, I got the valve covers back on and then torqued them to specs. You really don't need to use a lot of torque here, but setting it to the proper spec is important. And on this engine, it calls for 45 inch-pounds. I like to use a crisscross pattern here so I can distribute the load effectively and then give it one additional pass over just to make sure that everything is tightened down accordingly. At this point, I just needed to button up the distributor cap and the vacuum line going into the carb so I can fire up the engine and test the repair. So then I took the car out for a spin, the tick was gone, and I was very happy. If you want to see more detail on this procedure, check out my channel.